Paul, you and I are speaking on Wednesday, December 4th, just after the NYPD presser. What did you make about the evidence that the police department presented and of the questions remaining?
So it looks like right now they don't have a ton to go on, right? This is first blush, but this is one of those things where if you don't get the shooter fleeing from the scene or somebody identifies him, saw him running into the subway or something like that, you're going to end up down to the real sort of backgrounding detective work. And I'm sure by now they're looking very, very hard at the background life of the victim, because that's the one hard fixed data point you have. And so that's a place that you can go.
And talk to us about what seems to be, again, the evidence pointing towards the premeditation. So initially, police said that the suspect was waiting there for up to 4 hours. Later reports said it was sort of a smaller duration, so I think that might be still TBD. But what do you make of the planning efforts, the potential for a silencer, and then what that means for the getaway analysis? If someone plans a crime very well, the clearly successful murder, does this mean they are likely have equally planned the getaway, or is that still up for grabs?
I think it certainly points to the idea that this person planned the getaway. They seem to have known how to get out of the area very quickly, ran to this cut through that goes through the blocks. I know that spot. He knew enough to go there, and I'm saying he cognizantly. We don't know that it's a he. Probably it's a he from the way it looks in the video. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if this person not only had planned the getaway, but had walked that route. So as part of your investigation, what you're going to do is go before the event and look to see, do you see somebody who maybe matches that body language, who appears a couple of times in video in that alley? They're going to be pulling the video from in front of the Hilton. There's also this, though. According to the reporting, he arrived only a few minutes. I believe the chief of detectives said 5 minutes before the shooting. So some of the earlier reporting, as we always say, Emily, you and I have talked about this, in any incident like this, of the first 10 reports, 9 are going to be wrong. But it does look like he was able to put the victim on a dime in a location and time known to him. He arrives 5 minutes before, and he gets him right as he's going into the hotel. And the victim was staying in a different hotel nearby and had walked across very early in the morning. So if I am the shooter, you know, what you always try to do with these things is put yourself in the shooter's spot, right, with the few data points that we have. And if you're the shooter, you want to say to yourself, I have to try to kill this person. I am going to position myself outside of where he is staying, or try to get him someplace where maybe there are going to be less visuals and maybe less security, et cetera. Instead, he gets him at the convention center, where we know by definition thousands of people are coming in for this convention. It's riskier, right? So that tells me that his access point almost certainly was the convention. So that's what this person was looking at in terms of trying to contextualize where to get to Mr. Thompson. So if I'm the detectives as part of this effort, I'm looking very hard at his background life, a denied claim, all the obvious stuff. Yeah. But I'm looking very hard at the convention. Who knew about it, where it went out, the advertising, where the schedule was published. And that is going to be a digital investigation. You're going to look at that website. You're going to maybe dump the IPs that hit that website in the week leading up to it, or the 2 weeks leading up to it. Do any of those IPs match to somebody who's got a pending claim? That kind of stuff, to see how did he put this poor victim on a dime in front of that location just as he got there.
And it's my understanding this meeting was an investor meeting, which tends to be more private, tends to be more exclusive. Paul, what do you make of what detectives said at the NYPD presser was a perceived proficiency with the firearm? They said it apparently on video seemed to have jammed. Right. And so the suspect cleared it, they said, and in doing so left a bunch of live rounds behind in addition to the expended shells. What do you make of A, that perceived proficiency, and B, the fact that he left, or she left, live and expended rounds? Is that the hallmark of a rookie? Is that inconsequential then for evidence? Talk to us about that aspect.
Yeah, there were some contraindications here, some counterfactual. So you have him shooting, and he does it, right in broad daylight, and he has apparently a silencer, according to what they're saying. That said, if you look at the images, and they're blurry, it looks like a homemade silencer to me. Silencers are very streamlined. I could be wrong. Again, the images are blurry. But, a silencer can be as simple as taking a plastic 2-liter bottle of Coke and just, taping it to the outside of the gun. And actually, that suppresses a lot of the noise. Doesn't look to be something like that, but it could be homemade. But on the other hand, he did manage to hit this guy, and then he managed to clear the gun. And apparently he shot from a distance, but he also did miss. Apparently there were a number of shots that were air balls. So it's hard to say that he was really that proficient. He did manage to clear the jam, which is a fairly simple exercise. You kind of rack the slide, essentially, and he knew enough to do that. I'm assuming it was something like a 9mm automatic or something. And so, yeah, reportedly he left not only live shells at the scene, but the spent shells. They're going to run that stuff through the database, the ballistics database, the spent shells, certainly. That's a real shot in the dark. It's very hard to get a hit off of that. They have some ammunition they could potentially trace. That's at least going to tell them what kind of gun they're looking for, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then they're also going to look like, for instance, at his stance when he took the shots. Was he, did he hold the gun sideways? It doesn't look that way. But, like, there are indications of, like, how professional a person is and how comfortable they are with the gun. Again, from what I've seen in the blurry photos, et cetera, he doesn't look to have taken a very sort of professional stance, a military stance, et cetera. So, again, these are all things that are going to the hopper. I don't know there's that much that we can really glean from it right now because some things cut one way and cut the other. But we have to remember something else, too. What if he's hired? The indication here all along, the supposition, I should say, all along, has been, okay, he's likely going to be somebody who has some specific gripe against the company or against the victim. But what if this is a hired killer? That is going to make things that much more difficult because now you're one off from the motive, right? So who this person is, I think, not likely going to be gleaned from the stuff at the scene, the shells, et cetera. I think it's going to come almost certainly from a background, especially as we get further out from the event. It's going to come from the backgrounding that the detectives are going to do relative to the victim's life. And a lot of that's going to be digital. I know we talk about it all the time on the True Crime Podcast, but these days, detectives are essentially digital tech people.
Not because in any way I'm either prescient or knowledgeable, but I did think that entire time that this was a hired
Did you think
hired thug.
Yeah.
Totally. Because, and look, this is a story that immediately went in my head. It's based on nothing. But you have the high-profile CEO of this insurance company who worked his way up through the company. The other figurehead testified before Congress earlier this year, not him. This guy was a former CFO. He was a numbers guy. He was a great family man. He was with a different accounting firm prior to joining.
Waterhouse,
Yes, PwC, totally. And so this, by all that we know, this is a sweet numbers guy, family man. This is not the evil powerhouse figure that can sometimes be associated with the CEO position of companies that impact people's daily lives. And so that flew in my head with the whole disgruntled, heartbroken person, a denied claim, a loved family member lost, and then just the hiring, yes, of some random thug to execute, both literally and figuratively speaking. I never imagined that the actual person would be the one that pulled the trigger, especially given what we saw in that footage where it was, the ride up with the bike, running through the tunnel. And I know Midtown right here, but it takes a little bit to know Midtown, and it takes a bit to know this area. And certainly, especially at that Hilton, man, it's a complete, there are crowds everywhere.
Thousands
it's a nightmare to get through. Tonight is the Rockefeller tree lighting, by the way, as we record this on Wednesday night. So we cannot overstate the amount of crowds right now in the streets. So this is not, the expertise remains to be seen, but there was a level of proficiency and expertise we saw just on this grainy footage that to me is totally not a disgruntled person.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly was planned out, and he also knew something else, which is, okay, he runs through the cut through, and then he gets to the bike. Look, I'm not giving anything up that's not obvious, but it's the best way to get around Manhattan. There's a lot of cops on bikes now for that reason. We had a case that was never solved. Somebody put a low-level device, it was like a couple of M80s or something, on the military recruiting center in Times Square, blew out the door. A lot of blood and treasure went into that because it's a military recruiting center, federal crime, plus an explosive, right? We had a lot of people scraping at that. And the guy fled on a bike. Bike was recovered. Never solved that. Got away. It was at a time when there were fewer cameras in the city than we have now. But nonetheless, it makes things very difficult. And he knew enough not only to jump the bike onto a bike. He ran and then jumped on a bike. But not only that, he got himself into Central Park with the bike. Central Park has a lot of blind spots just because of tree cover. There are cameras in there, but they're not everywhere. All he has to do is go off trail. And he had that backpack. And that tells me, again, more planning and a certain level of at least ability, proficiency. When you're going to go, you don't have to be, an expert to realize, okay, you know what? They're going to likely catch me on cameras, so I'm going to go into some tree cover and change clothing. If I had to guess, that's what's in that backpack. And so coming out of the park, maybe on foot, I'm sure they're scraping that park very hard to look for that bike. Maybe he comes out on the bike. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he goes in the subway. And the bike, let's just talk real quickly about the bike. There's some reporting that it's a city bike, and everybody is adhering to that. I saw the images. That's not a city bike. So I don't know. I think people are conflating the idea that it's an e-bike with a city bike. And, I was misled as well. I heard, city bike. All right, well, you need a credit card to do that. They can go into that system and dump that and see if anybody nearby. It almost certainly is not a city bike from what I've seen. And it actually looks like it has an aftermarket battery on it. And the assumption was that it is an e-bike, and so a lot of these e-bike companies have GPSs on them so that if they're stolen, people can recover them, and so they're going to talk to that company. Chief of Detectives talked about that. But it's a possibility. I'm just talking about possible. Now we're speculating that you can buy batteries that you can hook to an old bike and makes it an e-bike. And if that's the case, then it's going to be a lot harder to track him because you're going to lose the ability to track the bike. Maybe he stole the bike, or maybe, again, it's an old junker that he just bought the battery. I'm dumping Amazon for people in the area who have bought that battery, things like that. So, it's, again, indicative of somebody who definitely did some thinking. And if that speculation is accurate, some pretty deep thinking, in which case you're up against somebody maybe, with some intellect. And the longer it goes, the tougher this is going to get because obviously by now he's well into the wind.
Yeah. I ride my bike every day, as you know.
You're a suspect.
And yeah, I know. And city bike, Lexus and I are always city biking around because you're right. That's literally the only way. And then subway when the weather sucks, which is why, I'm essentially hedging my bets of like, what crime am I going to be a victim of today? But the reality is that to get around, to your point, to get around in the city, it's like it is bike central out there.
Right.
And it's not the bike central that Portland, Oregon is. I don't mean those kind of bikes. The guys with the battery packs on the e-bikes or on the bikes in general, like it's like a highway on 6th Avenue and then on 9th going down. So for people that aren't familiar with New York right now, picture the insane traffic and the buzzes that you always see in the movies, but then add to that an entire layer of bikes going a million miles an hour because this is now the city of deliveries and immediate gratification with things. Messengers, this isn't the 80s of like Kevin Bacon, Quicksilver. These bikes, so you're right that the battery-powered bikes are absolutely everywhere. And everyone, by the way, it is cold. So everyone on these bikes are bundled up. You can't see people's skin. You can't see people's faces. They have glued gloves to the handlebars so that they keep warm. I mean, that's like a real thing. And the NYPD talked about the, quote, distinctive backpack that the suspect was wearing, to your point, in that he might have had a nondescript backpack along with a change of clothes. Absolutely. So that in Central Park is now stashed the distinctive backpack along with the outfit he was wearing, and perhaps now is another person in a full different outfit with a different, smaller backpack with a gun inside.
And in the subway.
And in the subway.
And into the subway with a Metro card that they bought with cash.
Right.
Take it to the ultimate end of, let's say, the E train, and now you're at JFK. So totally. I'm just speculating and trying to make things tougher for the PD here. But as time goes on, you have to start to admit to all these possibilities. And you have to say, at some point, okay, we didn't find the gun. And I can guarantee you they're turning over every garbage can and looking under every car. They're scraping Central Park like there's no tomorrow. They probably got dogs and everything else. They're looking very hard at the evidence at the scene. They're trying to find this witness. Apparently, there was a witness who apparently left. They're trying to ID that witness. That witness is not ID'd yet, according to Chief of Detectives. But at some point, I don't want to say cold because that's an overused term. A real cold case is something 25 years ago or something like that. I remember people saying that the Idaho case had gone cold a week into it, and that's just ridiculous. People have been they've bought into this like first 48 hours thing, there's a TV show or something. Yeah. And yes, sure, that's the case when you have a shooting that is maybe a lot more solvable, a lot more spontaneous, maybe not quite as, I don't want to say professional here, but maybe the tracks are not covered as well. Because most, murders, I should say, are rarely random. It's if you take out domestics and shootings between gun crews and drug crews, you're down to single digits in terms of murders. Murders all over the country, and in New York City as well, are in single digits for stranger murders. They're very, very rare, vanishingly rare, which is good news. But that's what makes them so tough to solve. And so, yeah, first 48 hours, sure. When it's a drug crew shot another drug crew, you got an informant, et cetera. Or, you know what, the woman is dead. Look at the husband. Oh, it turns out she had a boyfriend. He was disgruntled. That's the first 48 hours. A random hit like this, when I say random, I mean like stranger on stranger of some variety, which is what looks like we're looking at here. That is not going to be the first 48 hours. Now, that doesn't mean the case went cold, but like the Koberger case, you're going to look a lot. You're going to have to look a lot at the background life of the person. A ton of digital work these days, cell towers, things like that, as well as traditional gumshoe work of interviewing friends, family, that kind of thing.
Final question for you to explore, Paul, is the concept of this being that high-profile individual, not famous, but with a notable high-profile position. Talk to us about the world of private security, of insurance-required protections like private security and not even driving and the like. Would he have been in his position as CEO of UnitedHealthcare? Would there have been confirmed security? Do we know anything about whether, in fact, that was in place? And if not, what is your analysis of those high-profile individuals? How hard is it to protect them? And today, if he did have security, it failed.
Yeah, I would argue he probably didn't. He probably never, ever dreamed that would come to this. Now, unfortunately, according to the reporting right now, another network is reporting that they spoke to his wife. They found his wife, and she gave a quick statement. She said that there had been some threats, which is terrible because it means that the poor wife and the family, they are always going to question, should we have taken it more seriously? Should we have, even if the shooter didn't track to that threat. And let me just admit another possibility into all of this, which is it's mistaken identity.
Right.
Maybe it was a professional hit, or maybe it was a person with a one-on-one gripe, but shot the wrong person. Now, it doesn't look that way. But we have to be careful of, what they call in the industry confirmation bias, right? You're assuming, this guy was insurance company. Of course, people have gripes against him. That must be why they, that this happened. But you never know. So you have to, if you're sitting where the detectives are, you have to sort of explore every angle. But to your point, look, if these days, guns are ubiquitous. And the truth of the matter is our lives are a lot less opaque than they used to be. He almost certainly was scheduled to speak in a public schedule someplace that this shooter was able to identify and say, as we said at the top, I'm going to be able to put him on a dime at that location at that time. 30 years ago, that's a lot more difficult, pre-internet. But these days, if you're looking for this guy, you can get access to his schedule. He's going to be speaking at the investors meeting. That thing starts at XYZ o'clock, or maybe there's a breakfast meeting beforehand or whatever. He knew somehow that he was going to be able to encounter that guy there. And that almost certainly goes to the idea that he was a pretty public person, the victim was here. And if you're that kind of a person, you're going to have to marvel in the idea that you need security. And again, I go to the idea that it happened not at the victim's hotel as he left or as he was crossing the street or walking down the block, maybe someplace a little more secure. It happens on 6th Avenue and 54th Street in front of the Hilton. That's almost tantamount to doing it in Times Square. Yeah. And so, the person had a real gripe. So unfortunately, I think there likely will be some second guessing. And this is why the security industry is these days thriving.
Paul Mauro, thank you as always for your incredible insight. Of course, this tragic case that we will keep on the Fox True Crime podcast, listeners updated with any developments as they arrive.